Nowadays, you'll hear people speak of the Big Bang as if it's opposed to belief in God. You'll hear someone say, for example, I don't believe in God, I just believe in the Big Bang. And sadly, that is a very uninformed thing to say, because anyone who would say that does not know that the Big Bang Theory was opposed for decades by professional scientists because of its theistic implications. Hi there, everyone. This is Dr. John Bergsma from the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology and the Franciscan University of Steubenville. And this is our second in a series of videos on evidence for the existence of God. We could say proofs for the existence of God, but there's such a host of arguments about what do you mean by proof, etc. So let's just keep it simple and talk about evidence for God's existence. So we already had one video on this subject where we examined the reality of cosmic fine-tuning and how it points to an all-powerful, highly intelligent creator. In this video, we're going to examine another trajectory of thought based on the Big Bang, or the idea that the cosmos had a beginning in a first moment of time. Now, it's largely forgotten nowadays that the Big Bang Theory has not been around forever. In fact, up through World War II, the universe was considered to be static and eternal. So, looking at the history of science, certainly from the time of Darwin until through the 1940s, you had a concept of a steady state universe, it was called, an eternal universe that was neither expanding or contracting, but was essentially static. And that was the model of the cosmos that was employed by professional scientists. Now that began to change, as we'll discuss in a few moments. But nowadays, you'll hear people speak of the Big Bang as if it's opposed to belief in God. You'll hear someone say, for example, I don't believe in God, I just believe in the Big Bang. And sadly, that is a very uninformed thing to say, because anyone who would say that does not know that the Big Bang Theory was opposed for decades by professional scientists because of its theistic implications. Scientists did not like the Big Bang Theory. They opposed the Big Bang Theory because the idea that the universe had a beginning suggests that the universe has a creator. We'll see how that works as we unfold the story. So, as I said, up through World War II, the model of the universe that dominated scientific discussion was called the steady state model. And scientists tend to heap scorn on the Christian tradition and belief in what we call creatio ex nihilo. That is the belief that God created all things at a point in time out of nothing. Not literally out of nothing, as if nothing was a substance, but without any material precursors, God created all that exists, matter, energy, and all the things that are downstream of that. God called into existence in a moment, as it were. So again, the scientific community said that's completely irrational. All things coming into existence out of nothing in a point of time, that is irrational. We are the rational scientists. We believe, of course, in an eternal, infinite universe, the steady state model. All that began to change in the 1920s when a Belgian priest, who was also a physicist, named Father Georges Lemaître, began to argue for what he called a cosmic egg model of the universe based on his mathematics. You see, Father Georges Lemaître was working on mathematical modeling of the cosmos. He was in communication with Albert Einstein, and the mathematics that Father Lemaître was working on were suggesting that the universe was expanding. In fact, however Father Lemaître cooked the numbers or revised his formulas, it all pointed to a reality that the universe was in a state of expansion. So Father Lemaître viewed this as an egg that was growing, like the universe was an oval that was expanding, expanding, expanding. And so he called it the cosmic egg theory. Well, Father Lemaître was in communication with Albert Einstein about this, and Einstein was impressed with Lemaître's math, but he did not like the universal implications because it suggested then, if the universe was expanding, that if you rewound time, you would go back to a beginning, and therefore the universe was not eternal but had a start when it was an infinitely small speck. In fact, there is a semi-legendary account that Einstein told Lemaître, "I like your math, but I don't like your physics." In other words, I can't argue with your numbers, but the implications for physical reality I don't like. Well, what did Einstein do? He reworked Lemaître's formulas, but he added a constant into the formulas that would balance out the universe. He called it the cosmological, or I've heard it sometimes called the cosmic constant, which balanced the formulas and prevented the universe from expanding. Why did Einstein do that? Again, because he didn't like the idea of a universe that had a beginning, because that would suggest perhaps a God who had called the universe into existence. Einstein himself was an agnostic, and he was very much uncomfortable with notions of a divinity. Now, Einstein later admitted that this introduction of a cosmic constant or a cosmological constant for no other reason than to balance the formulas to resist expansion was wrong. He shouldn't have done that. It was quasi-unethical, and he admitted that later. But I just want to pause a moment to reflect upon this. What this incident demonstrates is that scientists are not immune from ideological, political, theological, and other concerns that affect the way that they do their science. Einstein had no other reason for introducing this variable into the formulas, I shouldn't say variable, but this constant into the formulas, other than the fact that he didn't like the implications. So this is the nature of science. Science is pursued by human beings who have political, theological, philosophical interests and agendas, and will do things like doctor their equations or spin the results of their research, etc., in order to pursue these ends that they have, because they are personal, invested human agents who have these kinds of interests. Well, let's continue the story. In 1929, Edwin Hubble, who was working at the Mount Wilson Observatory in California, demonstrated that all the galaxies that he could observe were moving away from one another. This was the first direct observation that agreed with Lemaître's cosmic egg mathematics, the idea of an expanding universe. Now, cosmic expansion, that is to say, if all the galaxies are moving away from one another, it implies a beginning, because if you rewind time, then everything would go back to an original expansion point, a kind of t minus 0, which would be an absolute beginning to the universe. And a lot of cosmologists are people who study the origins and the operation of the universe, the cosmos. Again, many cosmologists realized that an expanding universe implied a beginning to the universe, implied a finite universe. So this was the origin of Big Bang theory. And in fact, the Big Bang, as I said, was vehemently opposed by many scientists who did not like the idea of a universe with a beginning. In fact, the Big Bang term started as an insult, but it stuck. Let's talk about that for just a minute. Now, Big Bang cosmology, the idea of everything expanding from an initial point, an initial beginning, confirmed what theistic philosophers had been arguing for centuries. It had already been pointed out by more than one thinker that the universe had to have a beginning because past time cannot be infinite. Okay? the past cannot have extended forever into the past. Why not? Well, because the term past means finished, but infinite means unfinishable. And you can't have an infinite past time, because what you'd be saying there is you'd have a finished, unfinishable time period. And that is a logical contradiction, which is the worst kind of contradiction that you can have. So this had been pointed out again, because of the nature of time, time is unidirectional. That means it only goes in one direction. And time is also measurable. And a measurable unidirectional phenomenon cannot be infinite in its upstream direction. Why? Well, here's a way of imagining that. When I was trying to explain that to one of my sons, this reality of, the impossibility of infinite past time, I was trying to explain this to one of my sons maybe 10 years ago, and he was about 12 years old at the time. And I'm going through all the explanations. Infinite means unfinishable. Past means finished. You can't have a finished, unfinishable reality. And I was trying my best and finally asked him, well, do you understand what I'm saying? And he says, sure, Dad. It's kind of like this. If the opening crawl of a Star Wars movie was infinite, you would never get to the lightsaber duels. And I said, you're right. Okay. In other words, if the infinite crawl of the movie went on forever, you would never get to the movie itself. Now, we, right now, are clearly in the movie. The lightsaber duels are going on. They're going on in Israel, they're going on in Ukraine and Russia, etc. The duels are happening. Therefore, the opening crawl cannot have been infinite. All right. I don't know if that works for you, but it worked for my son, and I think it kind of makes sense. Well, getting back to the Big Bang reality, one of the last major scientific holdouts in the international community of cosmologists was Sir Fred Hoyle. Sir Fred Hoyle was the greatest British astrophysicist of the 20th century. He was knighted by the Queen for his contributions to astrophysics. And he was widely revered not only in the UK, but throughout the English-speaking world and beyond the English-speaking world for, again, his contributions to astrophysics. Now, Hoyle did not like the Big Bang, although he coined the term. He was giving a radio interview in 1949, and he began to ridicule, quote, the hypothesis that all the matter in the universe was created in one Big Bang. Term stuck, even though it was a phrase of contempt. And why did Hoyle not like the Big Bang? Well, the whole scenario sounded too much like, and God said, let there be light. Think about it. An explosion of energy that then condenses into matter and gives rise to the universe. Yes, indeed. Sounds too much like the opening lines of Genesis. So Hoyle fought the Big Bang from the 1940s all the way into the 1970s. And again, very ironically, the scientist who put an end to the last objections to the Big Bang was Stephen Hawking. Why is that ironic? It's because Stephen Hawking went to his deathbed as an atheist. He disliked the idea of God, even though he was married to a fairly devout Christian woman. Despite the fact that he did not like the idea of God, Hawking was the scientist who, again, put to rest the last objections to the Big Bang, sort of proving the Big Bang to the world community of scientists. Well, the Big Bang has very strong theistic implications because a universe with a beginning needs an explanation. It needs a cause. An eternal universe needs no cause, and it also gives evolution all the time in the world, quite literally. But a universe that has a beginning, first of all, needs a cause, and since it's finite, there's not enough time for evolution to have taken place. This is true, by the way, and it doesn't have to do merely with the age of the universe, but in particular, the age of the Earth, and then limitations on the time allowed for evolution by the fossil record, because we have to look at, what is the record of life on Earth, and what room within that record do we have for animals to mutate and to develop? And the answer to that is very little time at all, but that's a subject for a whole nother video. But anyway, a universe with a beginning has a finite amount of time. Evolution is now constrained, and since it has a beginning, we need to have an explanation of why it began. We need a cause. Okay, so let's discuss this a little further. Big Bang cosmology lends itself to what has always been called the Khalam argument, going back to the Middle Ages. This is a famous argument for God that was favored by Muslim philosophers. And it goes like this. Premise number one. Everything that comes into existence has a cause other than itself. I think that's pretty self-evident. If something comes into existence, it can't be caused by itself because itself did not pre-exist itself in order to cause itself, right? Something else must have pre-existed that was its cause, unless you're going to say that something just comes into existence for no cause at all, which is rather irrational, I would argue. So anyway, you can think about that, think what you think of it, but everything that comes into existence has a cause other than itself. I would suggest that's fairly self-evident. Premise number two, the universe has come into existence. That has now more or less been shown to be the case by science and expansionary models of the universe and Big Bang theory, etc. So you put those two premises together, and the conclusion is, therefore, the universe has a cause other than itself. What could that be? Well, let's talk about that a little further. Can we tell anything about this unnamed cause that gave rise to the universe? We'll call it the WCTU, the whatever caused the universe. Can we know anything about whatever caused the universe? Yes, we can, because there is an ancient principle in philosophy that you can know things about a cause by the nature of the effects. So starting from the effects that the cause has given rise to, we can reason backwards and know something about the cause. Now, the effect is the universe. Looking at the universe, can we tell anything about the cause of the universe? And the answer is yes. First of all, whatever caused the universe must be outside space and time. Why is that? It's because Einstein's formulas imply that all space and time came into existence with the Big Bang. Sometimes people talk about, well, what was before the Big Bang? Well, in a sense, there was nothing before the Big Bang because time started with the Big Bang. Due to the theories of relativity that Einstein developed and almost all scientists agree to nowadays, we see that space, time, matter, and energy are all relative to one another. You can't have time without space and matter. They are all interconnected. Neither can you have matter without time, and so forth. So they all come into existence together. And prior to the Big Bang, there was no matter, there was no space, there was no time. So whatever caused the universe has to be outside of time, outside of space. It can't be material because matter came into existence with the Big Bang. And it can't be energy because energy came into existence with the Big Bang. So whatever caused the universe, it's not matter, energy, and it's not related to time or space. Okay, it's some reality that is outside of all of those things. Secondly, whatever caused the universe must be as powerful as the universe. How powerful is the universe? Well, it's amazing. It's unimaginable. It's unimaginably large, unimaginably massive, unimaginably energetic. So whatever caused it must be commensurate with all of those properties, must be something that is able to produce an unimaginably large and massive effect. There's an ancient principle in philosophy as well that a cause has to be commensurate with its effect. You know, you're not going to say that a cat caused the universe, because a cat cannot generate the power, the energy, the mass, etc., that is necessary, right? So the cause has to be commensurate, has to be adequate to the effect. Point number 3, whatever caused the universe must be highly intelligent. Why? Because as we saw in the previous video, the universe is finely tuned to allow life. The mathematics of the universe is amazing, balanced on a razor's edge in such a way as to permit the possibility of intelligent advanced life. Now, the universe doesn't make intelligent advanced life easy, but it does allow it. And the mere permission for life to exist in the universe is nothing short of a miracle, and a miracle, in fact, of design. It bespeaks unintelligence. Okay, so putting it all together, whatever caused the universe must be outside space and time. It must be as powerful, really, we should say more powerful than the universe in order to bring it into existence, and whatever caused the universe must be highly intelligent. Put all those things together, something that is outside space and time, highly powerful and highly intelligent, that sounds like the traditional definition of God. So there we go. And it's not just theists that realize this. It's not just people who are already predisposed to believe in a God who recognize the implications of the Big Bang. What I find interesting is the number of non-theistic scholars, non-theistic scientists, scientists who are either agnostic or atheists, who nonetheless recognized that Big Bang cosmology points to a creator. One such scientist was Dr. Robert Jastrow. I don't know if you've heard the name before, but Dr. Robert Jastrow, from about 1960 to 1980, was the United States' top rocket scientist. You know the saying, it's not rocket science, which means it's not some highly complex, very difficult to comprehend subject matter. That phrase, it's not rocket science, came from a time period in American culture where the U.S. government recruited the smartest young men and women in the country to go into rocket development for the space program and for nuclear weapons. So rocket science became synonymous with being the smartest person in your generation and recognized by the government and being snatched up to work on this highly strategic discipline that the government needed. So Robert Jastrow was a rocket scientist among rocket scientists. He was one of the founding members of NASA, and when NASA was formed in 1958, he was placed at the head of the theoretical division of NASA. That means he's so smart, they didn't even put him on building rockets. Anybody could do that math. That was just engineering. They put him on thinking up radical new possibilities that NASA could explore. So he was a genius among geniuses. And Robert Jastrow lived through the whole period when the paradigm within natural science shifted from the steady state model to the Big Bang cosmology. And in fact, late in his career, he wrote a book called God and the Astronomers. And in this book, Jastrow narrated the account of this blow-by-blow move by the community of scientists from one paradigm to another until the Big Bang cosmology became the regnant paradigm dominating international science. And at the end of his book, narrating this development from one model to another, this is how Jastrow concluded. He said, and again, this is on the last page of his book, God and the Astronomers. The last sentence, he says, or sentences, He says, "For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries." What does he mean by that? Well, Big Bang cosmology, essentially proven by scientific methods, suggests that there is a God who has called the universe into being, and that is what theologians have been claiming for centuries. In another interview, Jastrow said, "Astronomers now find they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact." He said that in August 6, 1982, in an interview with Christianity Today magazine. So, to wrap this up, Big Bang theory, or any expanding universe cosmogony, strongly points to a creator outside of space-time.